Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new build video with me, Sherman. Almost said let's talk. And today we're going to be taking a look at the Shadow Guard build, but before I go any further, I need to clear up some misconceptions a lot of people have with the builds I'm releasing. One, these are not meta builds. Two, they are not competitive in-game builds. These are builds to help people get to the end game. That's it. They're builds that work really good in dungeons, and they're builds that work good in trial play to help people get to that more competitive scene, or allow them to learn the mechanics of the end game so that they can make adjustments to this build if they want to become more in-game viable. It's just a way to help them get an understanding. That's it. Because all a build is a template. It's an idea. And a lot of them, yes, we theory craft. But we also test a lot of these builds. Now, you're going to ask for, well, show me video proof that these work. Well, I would. But unfortunately, I have a rule. And that rule is really simple. I asked to record and get permission from the people I'm playing with. If the people I'm playing with do not respond, do not give me a yes or no answer, I don't record. If they give me a yes from two people and no from the other one, I don't record. Because I have respect for people's privacy. That's it. The reason I don't show a lot of gameplay videos is that reason. Now, when I play with my normal group, I tend to record. I show off gameplay, I show off the builds in action, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, my group isn't on all the time when I am. Some of them work full-time jobs. So, some of them have different schedules than I do. So that's why I don't do a lot of recording with a lot of people. Now, I would love to bring you guys more gameplay videos, and I plan on it. It's just going to take time. So, how do I know these builds work? Well, one, a lot of these builds I've made, or I'm releasing in this time period, these 35 builds, have been all tested. Some in dungeons, some in trials, some in normal mode trials, some in vet trials. It just depends. It depends on the situation at hand. Like during Morrowind, I tested a lot of builds in Halls of Fabrication. I didn't record a lot of those runs because I didn't have permission, not only from the company, because I was under NDA, but also from the people I was playing with. Now, I'm going to be also honest with you guys. I don't play a lot of trials. And the reason I don't play a lot of trials is there's really no reward there for me, other than completing. So I don't play in the competitive scene of trials. Now, if you're looking for more meta stuff, I'm going to direct you to the people who deal with meta stuff, like Alcast, or Wooler, or Gilliam the Rogue. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to direct you to them, because that's what they do. That's what they focus on. What I focus on is more or less teaching people the game and the aspects of the game and the options available. So these builds that I'm working on, including the Shadow Guard tank, plus the Barbarian tank, plus the Tesla tank, are all builds that I know work. I've played test them. So that's all, the only proof I can give you is my word. And I know in this day and age, the word of a person doesn't go very far. So I apologize if my builds aren't up to speed with what a lot of people want. Now back to the subject at hand, which is the Shadow Guard tank. Let's get right into it. So this is the Shadow Guard. It is a Dark Elf Nightblade tank, and you can use other races. You just won't reach the same resource pools that the Dark Elf can. And that's because the Dark Elf gets 9% max stamina, or 9% max magicka, 6% max health. Or 9% max magicka, 6% max stamina. Jeez. So they get that. They get no resource management to the race, so they don't get extra like stam recovery or magic recovery, but they do get increased fire resistance. Now, Dark Elves also work really good as vampires, and this build would work better with a vampire, but I didn't want to make them a vampire. I just wanted to offer the option out to the players if they want to make it a vampire. Would it make it better for in-game? Yes. Because of the benefits of playing a vampire, gives you 10% more stam recovery and magic recovery, it plays in the build really good. But you have to be at a certain stage of vampire for that to work. To get a lot of the benefits from the vampire, you have to be at the max stage. Dark Elves get fire resistance. 2,000 something fire resistance, which is actually a big chunk of the vampire's weakness to fire. So it kind of counteracts it, but doesn't. It does a good job of it, but it doesn't remove all of it. So it helps you maintain being a vampire. That's why I chose the Dark Elf for this build. As you can see, though, it has 26k magicka, 25k stamina with a 37k health. Its recovery isn't the greatest. Like I said, if you were a vampire, it would be better, but I do want to show you a tri-stat pot on it so you can see. With a tri-stat pot, you get 1,045 magic recovery with a 958 stamina recovery. This is important to this build, and I'll get to why in a minute. So, next up, you'll notice that the spell and weapon damage isn't really high, but the weapon damage is a lot higher than, or a little bit higher than the spell damage, and that's because of preference of play. I like a tank that I can play in the open world and be fine with it, and when I do dungeon play, I can bring a little bit more to the group than just buffs and debuffs and all that kind of stuff. I can bring a little bit of extra damage. It's not going to be a whole lot, but it's going to be enough to make a difference. Next up, you'll notice that my spell and physical resistances are kind of low for being a tank, but that's okay, because I'm going to make up the difference with a lot of other things. And we'll get to that in a minute. Moving on down the line, you'll notice that I have minor toughness. Now, I have minor toughness because of one of the gear sets I'm running. It gives me it all the time. Now, you got to remember, a Dark Elf doesn't get extra health benefits like the Nord does, or the Argonian does, or the Imperial does, or the Orc does. They don't get that 6% to 12% max health. Minor toughness allows them to get that higher health pool, and even though that they lose the benefit of what those other tanks get, they still gain the health that they need to be a viable tank. So that's why I chose this set that utilizes that. Next up, you'll notice we have the Antronach Mundstone. This increases our magic recovery. Because we're a Dark Elf, or not a Dark Elf, a Nightblade, we get 15% magic recovery and stamina recovery, but we're not using anything in our gear sets that gives us extra magic recovery. We only get it from one stamina piece, or one of our sets do we get stamina recovery, and that's how come our stamina recovery is a little bit higher than our magic recovery, and why I'm using the Antronach Mundstone is to get that higher magic recovery. Moving on, right here you can see we're using Tri-Stat Food. This increases our max health, max magicka, max stamina. This is essential to this build. So you want to use Tri-Stat Food with this build, and you don't want to use anything else. And I'll explain why I have the stat pool so high. So let's go ahead and take a look at the gear before we get into the stat pools and reasons why. So we are running 4 pieces of sturdy, 3 infused, 2 Nirnhone shields. I'm going to get that out of the way. The 3 infused pieces we're using is the helm, the chest, and the legs, the Nirnhone shields, and then we're using 4 sturdy pieces. The shoulders, the gloves, the belt, and the boots are all sturdy. The reason I chose this route is because I looked at the game in all its spectrums, not just what the meta offers now, but what it also offered in the past. See, in the past, in fact, roughly right before or right after 1 Tamriel, that's how tanks used to run. They used to run 3 or 4 sturdy pieces, or 4 infused pieces and 4 sturdy pieces. I just went back to that design, and that's why we have the higher stamina pool, is because we're not getting as much in block cost as we used to. Because they adjusted block cost back then for greater block costs with Morrowind and stuff, and then they reduced it again with Dragon Bones, which is the next DLC coming up, and what this build is based on. So they lowered it to $17.30 in cost. So because of that, we don't need as much block cost reduction. We can actually go with less and just bigger stamina pools to make up the compensation, if you will. So that's what I did here, is I gave it compensation. I compensated for what I didn't have in block cost and made it up with stamina. And if I were to go with more block cost, I could go a lot less stamina. But because of the way I set the build up, it needs that more stamina. So moving on through the gear sets, we are running a 2-piece Bloodspawn with stamina recovery on the 1-piece. On the 2-piece, when you take damage, you have a 6% chance to generate 14 ultimate and increase your physical and spell resistance by 6,450 for 6 seconds. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds. So as long as you're getting hit and taking on some damage, every 6 seconds you can generate 14 ultimate and gain that extra resistance bonus. But it's such a small chance that it's not as effective against a single target as it is against multiple targets. So this is really good for when you're playing with trash. Now you can switch this set out with like Lord Warden or something else. It will give you extra resistances, which would be more beneficial to you. But you're going to wind up going over the cap of resistances when you buff up. So you can still run Lord Warden and be fine. Next up, we're running 5-piece Warrior Poet. Now this is the set that gives us minor toughness. And I already explained why I'm running this set. Dark Elves don't get the health benefits other classes do, or other races do. So that 10% really plays with them really well by giving them extra health. The set itself gives 2 things of max health in the 2-piece and 5-piece bonus, and the 3 and 4-piece bonus are resistance buffs. So this allows you to get greater resistances without using reinforced or champion points to increase your resistance value. That's why I ran it with the Nightblade. Nightblades also don't get any resistance bonuses. Naturally, they have to cast abilities to get those resistances. So, alright, moving on to the next setup. We are running 3 pieces or 5 pieces of training. And the trainee set, a lot of people don't utilize. I chose it for this build in particular because of the benefits it does overall. See, it gives you max health, max magic, and max stamina in the 4-piece. 2, 3, and 4-piece. In the 5-piece, it gives you extra max health, magic, and stamina. It's kind of like using tri-stat glyphs, which all the gear is loaded with tri-stat glyphs. So every piece has tri-stat glyphs in it. And that's how we get the high resource pools. With being a Dark Elf, you get 6% max stamina and 9% max magicka. Now, we are a Nightblade, and we also boost our max magicka through being a Nightblade. So that's how we get the higher max magicka and the high max stamina, is because we have those 2 benefits going on. Moving on down to the shields, like I said, both shields are Nirnhone, and the weapons themselves are both infused training weapons. Now I'm running 2 swords. You can run whatever you want, axe, mace, dagger, it doesn't matter. I choose swords because I prefer them on a tank. So as you can see, we're running in a hardening enchant on the main bar, and the reason why is for greater survivability for when you're getting into the dynamics of the trial. It makes you a little bit more effective to learn the trial scene, because it's not as complicated then. It's a little bit easier to get through that process of learning the mechanics, both in normal and in vet mode. Now you can switch this out to a Crusher enchant later on if you want to. On the back bar, we are running a Crusher enchant and an infused weapon, and it will stay consistent. Every 5 seconds you can reapply Crusher enchant, which makes it really effective for you. And it doesn't matter what ability you use. As long as it does damage, it will apply the Crusher enchant. So it's really good on the back bar and also on the front bar. But become comfortable first before you switch this out. Now you can also make some adjustments to the stuff by making this sturdy, this sturdy, this sturdy, and making the shield sturdy. But you're going to lose a little bit in resistances when you do that, because the Nirnhone is going to drop down with sturdy down to like 1700 on the shield. So you're going to lose about 400 resistances, which can really affect the build when it comes to long term. So that's the only reason why I run Nirnhone. You can run sturdy and be fine. You're just going to lose about 400 resistances, which is going to put you at 20k physical and at 21k spell. Alright, so moving on to the next thing. And excuse me guys, my voice is a little rough because I've been doing so much recording. So moving on to the skills, I'm going to tell you guys this. I'm just going to tell you what passives to make sure you unlock. Make sure you unlock all your class passives no matter what. So if you're playing a Nightblade, make sure you unlock this to 50, this to 50, this to 50, and make sure you get all the passives unlocked. Because regardless of whether it's going to be something you need or don't need, your passives are always unlocked to you. So any skills you do use are going to give you the benefits of whatever it might do in the passive area. That's why you want them unlocked. So moving on to Sword and Shield, all passives. When it comes to armor skills, if you are wearing a 5-1-1 setup, always make sure you unlock the passives for the armor types you're wearing. Whether it be 5 heavy, 1 medium, 1 light, 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy, 5 medium, 1 light, 1 heavy. Always make sure you unlock the passives for them and the ones that are going to benefit you. So on light armor, when you're playing a tank in 5-piece heavy, you want to unlock the 3 top ones. Because these are going to give you benefits that you don't, you need just that little bit of extra. So this is going to give you 4% magic recovery. This is going to give you 2% reduced cost in your magic abilities. And this is going to give you a little bit of extra spell resistance. Medium armor, on the other hand, is going to give you increased weapon critical by a small amount. It's like a 0.5% of critical. Then you get this, which increases your stamina recovery and reduces your cost of stamina abilities. And then you're going to get athletics. And athletics is going to increase your movement speed by 3% with each piece of medium armor equipped. So it's going to increase your sprint speed by 3%. And it's going to reduce your dodge roll cost by 4%. Now that's important, especially for your champion points. We'll get to that in a minute. Moving on to heavy armor, because I'm a tank, I want all of them. If I wasn't wearing 5 pieces of heavy armor, I'd want the top 3. And that's it. So, moving on, I also have Unstoppable unlocked, and I'll get to the reason why when we go over the skills. Moving on, Soul Magic, just make sure you unlock these 2, and you max them out, because of the benefits that they offer you. This allows you to revive once every hour without a soul gem. That saves you soul gem use. This one allows you to fill empty soul gems on a 10% chance. That's really beneficial to you. Moving on, Fighters Guild, always unlock Intimidating Present for questing purposes, and then Banish the Wicked. No matter what, if you're a tank, a DPS, it doesn't matter, always get Banish the Wicked. Even if you're a Magicka player. The reason why is because of that 9 ultimate generation, whenever you kill an undead, Daedra, or werewolf. This allows you to build ultimate really fast. Moving on to here, Persuasive Will. That's all you need. Moving into Undaunted. Always unlock both Undaunted passives as fast as you can, or as quickly as you can, because you want these things. You want the Undaunted command. Look at this one. It gives me 4% of my max resources back whenever I activate a synergy. So a synergy is an ability that you can activate, and it can do a lot of different things. Some do damage, some give you resources back, some do a lot of different things. This one allows you to get a small portion of those resources back whenever you activate one, so it's good to keep for resource management. The next one is when you're wearing each type of armor type, as long as you're wearing one of each piece, you will get 2% per 2% max health, max stamina, and magicka per piece. So I get 6% because I'm wearing 5 heavy, 1 light, 1 medium. And it's essential you get these. So moving on, you're not going to be unlocking any passives here except for this one. And that's if you're running a support skill to give you extra magicka recovery. That's it. Make sure you unlock all your racial passives, and then down here, make sure you learn the medicinal use and the provisionings, gourmand, and connoisseur. These are really essential for in-game purposes. You want the longer time span of your food and drink, and you want the longer potion time span. Alright, so now we're going to go over the skills on the bar, and I'm actually going to go up here because some of these skills you can switch out to give you greater effect. So first off, on the main bar, we are running Teleport Strike morphed into Ambush. And the reason I chose this ability is because the Nightblade doesn't have chains like the DK, so it can't pull enemies to them. But what it does have is it has teleport strikes, which allows them to move between targets really fast and at a decent range. So if there's an enemy over here that you need to taunt, you can teleport strike to it, taunt it, and teleport strike back. And you're going to be using resources, but it's okay. You're going to be using resources even when using chains. So this gives you a way of doing that and maintaining that good control over your enemies. Watch spamming use. Do not over spam this because you don't want to burn through a lot of resources because you're going to be blocking attacks and everything else. Moving on to the next one is Pierce Armor. Now Pierce Armor is your taunt, your main taunt. It also does a little bit of damage, and with the use of Teleport Strike you get in power, which increases the damage of your next attack. It should always be taunt. So you're going to Teleport Strike, taunt, and that's going to boost that damage by 20%, and it's going to give you an extra way of applying some extra damage to the enemies just to get them down a little bit quicker. It just helps. Next up, you also get Major Breach and Major Fracture with this, and that's really important that you apply this to your enemies. It increases your group's overall DPS because you're reducing their resistances. Now, if you guys didn't know, enemy NPCs in the game have a resistance value based off of 500, where ours is 660. So for 1 point of mitigation on us is 660 armor, or spell or physical resistance. For enemies in the game, they have both spell and physical resistance equal to a flat value. The overland mobs have 9,100, and all normal dungeon mobs have 9,100. Trial mobs on normal have 14,380, I think it is, and then at vet they have 18,200. If you go through and you calculate how much they get in resistances based on a 500 to 1 ratio, they actually at the 18,000 have like a 36% damage mitigation. So you want to remove that damage mitigation so you can go through that armor and just hit them directly. That's why you want to build your builds or your groups with the idea of maximizing penetration values. And Sword and Shield really helps with that. Next up is Spike Bone Shield. Spike Bone Shield's a really good ability for mitigating damage. Especially when you're in a dungeon or a trial, you're going to get hit a lot as a tank. And this allows you to mitigate chunks of damage, because it doesn't get removed right away. They have to remove it within the 6 seconds, or it'll fall off in 6 seconds, and then you can recast it and keep it applied. This is why we also run the hardening enchant, is so it'll stack with this damage shield. So I'm just going to show you guys this real quick so you guys can see for yourselves why it's important. So I'm going to go down here and just hit this skeleton with my sword, with taunt, or teleport strike, and then pop my bone shield. And you'll see I get like an 18k damage shield. That 18k damage shield I can keep up consistently as long as I'm light attacking, I'm heavy attacking, and I keep my bone shield up. Even if I apply taunt, it will do it. So I can even be in block, keep bone shield up, and just taunt, and I can keep the damage shield applied. Now that damage shield for my sword only lasts for 5 seconds, where bone shield lasts for 6. So you want to keep it consistent. So that way you get greater survivability when you're facing certain encounters that are a little bit more difficult. That's why we run Bone Shield and why we're using the Hardening Enchant. Alright, moving on through the skills. Next up we have Absorb Magic. Now you can use either version, Absorb Magic or the other one. Or you can just use Defensive Posture. It doesn't matter. What matters about this, having this on your bar, is what it does passively. And that's while you have a shield equipped and this ability slotted, the amount of damage you can block is increased by 8%. And the cost of blocking is reduced by 8%. So you get 8% more damage mitigation, and you get 8% more reduced cost. So it saves you resources, and it gives you that greater damage mitigation. That's why you want it there. Because when you block an attack, it reduces the damage by another 8%. Besides the 20 it gives you base. Now, some classes like the DK And the Templar also get beneficial block things. Like the DK gets 10% from both physical and spell damage. They just get an extra 10%. Templars get 15% from all melee attacks. So in some cases, a Templar is going to be a better off-tank or a main tank for certain encounters versus a DK. But it's going to be select. Like if you were to take, for example, playing a Hellraw Citadel. In Hellraw Citadel, a Templar is better than a DK, especially against the Axis, because they take more reduced damage against the Axis, because they're not hitting you with ranged attacks, they're hitting you with melee attacks. So they can actually save more resources and have greater survivability against them with that kind of setup. So, moving on through the skills. Next up, we have Power Extraction. Now, you can use Sap Essence if you want to, but this is basically an ability you're going to use. You're going to walk into a room, and you're just going to do this a few times to grab the attention of the mobs. Because it doesn't matter how much damage somebody else does. As long as you do damage first, the tank does damage first, they grab the attention of the mobs. So they're going to grab the attention of the mobs with that ability. Now you can swap this out if you want to, say, Caltrops, to give you greater area control and stuff. But the reason why I chose to use this ability is so I get the 9% max magicka from the 8% max magicka from siphoning and Magicka Flood. This increases your max magicka pool by 8% with while it's slotted. So that's why I did it, is so I can have more consistency with my magicka, because I do use magicka abilities. The next skill we have slotted is Veil of Blades. Now, Veil of Blades is a dungeon use only ability. When you're playing through a dungeon, this is what you're going to be using over Warhorn, and the reason why is because of how it works. It reduces the movement speed of enemies by 70% that are within the circle. It also takes 2,419 damage every second, and granting you major protection. You and your allies major protection, reducing your damage taken by 30%. The other reason why it's really important in the dungeon, it's a synergy. Just like Bone Shield is a synergy, you want both of these for that purpose of extra synergies. Because they just changed how synergies work, and now you don't get the benefits of synergies except for every 30 seconds. So having more synergies in the group will help out, because you can activate these synergies and have them going more consistently. So moving on to the back bar. On the back bar we have Reverberating Bash. Now I'm going to show you guys a few abilities you can swap this out with if you want to. So if you want to swap Reverberating Bash out with anything, I would suggest swapping it out with the Undaunted Taunt and her Rage. Now this is a Magicka Taunt. Now that's the other reason why I have so much Magicka, is so that I can use this kind of ability to save me resources in my stamina. So I can have a ranged taunt if I need it. But you only need this in a trial situation. In a dungeon situation, it's not needed. That's why we're running Reverberating Bash instead. So this one is going to allow you to apply Major Defile to certain enemies. In some cases, it's going to be better for you to run Major Defile than it is going to be to run the Taunt, because that Major Defile in certain situations is better. That's why Reverberating Bash is going to be better for you. It also has a 3-second stun, which is really good, because the more you can stun enemies when they're off immunity, the better off you are. Now, that stun doesn't work against bosses, but it does work against trash. So it's a really good way to just like put somebody in their place for a second, apply Minor Maim through Heroic Slash, and then turn on the back to the enemy you're fighting, so that way, if they do turn off of you and go after somebody, they're going to get that damage reduced by 15% for 12 seconds. And this is where the next ability comes into play, and that's Heroic Slash. Heroic Slash is a really good ability for tanks to use, because not only does it generate them ultimate, but it also applies Minor Maim for 12 seconds. It is the longest lasting adaptation of Minor Maim in the game. And this is why a lot of people run Sword and Board on main tanks. It's easier to keep uptime of Minor Maim. Another thing that's good about this ability is it does do a decent amount of damage, and it reduces the movement speed of the enemy by 12%. Now, there is another morph of this called Deep Slash, which hits 3 targets, but those 3 targets get the movement speed and the minor maim applied to them. It just doesn't give you minor heroism, which is why this ability works good on a main tank, because they need that ultimate gen for things like Warhorn, or the things like that Circle of the Veil of Blades. You want consistency. So getting the consistency of ultimate allows you to keep those abilities in action better. Alright, moving on to the next ability. We have Mass Hysteria. Now this is one that you can also switch out with another ability. I'll explain which one here in a second. But this basically terrifies your enemies and makes them run in fear. 2 enemies run in fear for 4.5 seconds. So they're going to run away, and that's fine. But it won't affect a boss. And that's where this really shines, is it allows you to become a tank against a boss without fearing them. But when the fear ends on those enemies it does affect, it gives them reduced movement speed of 53% for 4 seconds, and they are afflicted with minor maim for 4 seconds. So this is a way for you to get that minor maim applied to your enemies and keep you consistent. Now, there is 2 other abilities you can use besides this that are really good. You can use Refreshing Path, or I would suggest this one, Dark Shades. This one summons 2 shades to yourself to attack the enemy at your side for 17.3 seconds. They do magic damage. That's why we have the higher magicka pool, is so if you want to use this ability you can, and it's going to give you that greater benefit. And they apply minor maim as well every 4 seconds. So for that 17 seconds, they will apply minor maim 3 times, or 2 times, I forget, but it's one of the amount. I don't really use these too much, but you can use them. The other ability you can swap out for these, because what this allows you to do, to have that shadow ability there, is to get Shadow Barrier. And it says casting a shadow ability grants you major resolve and major ward. This is how you're going to beef your resistances up. But it only lasts for 6 seconds. Now, for each piece of heavy armor equipped, you increase that duration by 25%. Well, here's the thing. 125% is 13 seconds. And 13 seconds isn't a really long time to keep that up. This works good in dungeons. But in trials, you need something with a longer time span. And this is why we have the heavy armor Unstoppable unlocked, is so we can swap it out in trials and we get consistency of resistances more effectively, to where we're not wasting our resources trying to keep these abilities casted all the time. We can cast them and let them run their time, and then swap back and recast them. So that's what you want to do with this kind of a setup when you're playing in a trial. So that's why Unstoppable's there. So just letting you guys know so you understand how this works and why I play it the way I do. So moving on, the next ability we have is Mirage. This is going to apply minor ward and minor resolve. Now, a lot of people will be like, well, you're going to get that from Combat Physician or Combat Prayer. Well, Combat Prayer's minor ward and minor resolve only lasts 8 seconds. So unless the healer's reapplying to me this every 8 seconds, it's not as effective. This is more consistent and effective. It's 26 seconds in length, which is the equivalent to the Unstoppable, which is 27 seconds. So I can keep these both up for almost 30 seconds without that. This one, not, but you know what I mean. So you can keep the consistency, and that's what it's about, consistency. Now, the next ability is another ability I switch out for another ability. So the next ability is Swallow Soul. I use this in dungeons to increase my healing received, but also to apply some damage and to heal me. So I don't have to rely on the healer as much. I have a way of maintaining my own survivability. Now, I also have this applied here to get that 8% max magicka from the passive down here, Magical Flood. Now, one of the abilities you can swap it out with, and I do this in trials, or have done this in trials with this build, is Leeching Strikes. Now, you can go with the other one, which is magicka based, which is going to be a little bit better, honestly. But the reason I choose Leeching Strikes is read what it says. Imbue your weapon with soul-stealing power, causing your light and heavy attacks to heal you and restore so much stamina for 20 seconds. So anytime I do a light or heavy attack with this thing, I get 1,640 health and 106 stamina. But if I recast it, you restore up to 4,200 additional stamina when the effect ends, based on the length of time Leeching Strikes was active. So if I cast this, and I'm fighting an enemy, let's say, I'm going to let it run its course. I'm going to go down here and I'm just going to use some abilities. And we're just going to do, waste some stamina, that kind of stuff. Now you'll see I have 2 seconds. If I cast it now, I get resources back, a chunk of resources. If I do a heavy attack right afterwards, I can keep those resources coming in. And that's what it's about. That's what resource management for a tank is. Managing their resources the most effectively. So that allows me to manage my resources in trials a little bit better when it comes to stamina. Now, it is better to use the Magicomorph with this build if you're not comfortable playing with what you have for magic recovery. Now, if you're comfortable playing with the magic recovery you have, use the Stamina Morph. Because stamina is what you use the most of. Use Magicka for applied effect. So, you don't have to make this build this way if you don't want to. You can make them a Nord and make them a pure stamina build and just use stamina abilities. So instead of using this, you're going to use Unstoppable. You're going to use Mirage, and that's the only magic ability you're going to be using. You're going to be using this, which is a stamina cost, but it also gives you stamina back. So it's a really good resource management, especially for a stamina tank. The only reason why I'm playing this build the way I am is because I just wanted to show people that you can get a decent amount of resources if you want to use other things. So that's why I use Funnel Health or Swallow Soul, and I use Mirage, and I use this ability. These are 3 magic abilities. With having a greater magical pool with a greater magical return, I can keep these up more consistently with my Magicka, and I'm not wasting stamina. So that's why this build has the greater stamina pool and the greater magical pool. So the last ability we have on our bar is Aggressive Warhorn. And the reason we have Aggressive Warhorn here is to increase the group's max Magicka, max stamina, and max health. Now, we're not going to get minor toughness. We already have it. But we will get max Magicka and max stamina. And that's going to help with our group's overall experience. Now, the other reason why we're taking Aggressive Warhorn is to apply Major Force, increasing critical damage done by 15%. Now, you're not going to get a lot of critical hits in a group from Warhorn. But if you have consistency of Warhorn, there's a chance that some of those will be good for you because you'll get that extra 15%. And I'll explain why that's good for you as a tank. So, but yeah, Aggressive Warhorn, definitely use it. And I just want to show you guys so you guys can see. When I use Warhorn, the reason why it's good for me is it takes me up to 28k Magicka, 27k stamina. This gives me more resources to utilize and makes me more effective as a DPS, or not as DPS, but as a tank. So it gives me greater resources to work with for blocking, more resources. And this is why I went for the higher resource pool and less like block cost reduction. I went that route instead. Because not only does it improve my character overall, but it also improves my character's damage done. Now, I'm not playing to be a damage dealer. I'm playing to be a tank. But when I'm not tanking, and we're fighting through trash in a dungeon, that gives me more capabilities to help kill that trash. That gives me more capabilities of doing more increased damage against the boss with my abilities. Now, to some, 4,000 damage here, 5,000 damage here, maybe 10k, maybe 11, just depending, isn't a lot. But it adds up, just like stamina DPS, just like Magicka DPS. It adds up. And the more damage being done by the group in total, the faster things get done. Now, you're not going to make that improvement by a huge margin. We're talking like, in some cases, seconds. In some cases, we could be talking about an extra minute off your total runtime. And that's what that allows you to do with being a tank with these kind of capabilities. So now let's go take a look at the champion points, and we're going to just go through these really quick. I'm going to kind of explain where you want to put points first and all that kind of stuff as we go through. So starting with the red tree, you're going to put 37 in Ironclad. This is going to reduce the damage you take from direct damage by 15%. This is important. Tanks need all the mitigation they can get to have that greater survivability to where they're not taking a lot of damage. Now remember, as a Nightblade, you don't get a lot of extra ways to mitigate damage, but you do have one ability that does increase your dodge chance, and that's where Mirage also comes into play, which I should have pointed out real quick. So Mirage not only gives you the extra resistances, it also gives you a 15% dodge chance without dodge rolling. So you still get the chance of dodging certain attacks. That's where the Nightblade is separated from all the other classes. They're the only class that gets that ability to auto dodge without using a armor skill from medium armor. So this works out better for them. So going back into the champion points, the next one is Thick Skin. Thick Skin, you want to put 37 points in to get 15% reduced damage from damage over time effects. This helps you basically mitigate more damage. This is really important for a tank again. Remember, tanks have the highest resistance values of a group. They have the best blocking capabilities of the group, and they're made to mitigate damage. You need that greater mitigation in not only damage reduction, but also resistances. Otherwise, it doesn't work that well. Next up, we have 43 in the Hardy and 43 in Elemental Defender. This is where you're going to start with your champion points when you hit CP levels. You're going to start putting into Hardy and Elemental Defender first, because you're going to want to get those things maxed out before you start putting into other things, because this is essential. These block all or reduce all damage types. Not just direct damage, not just damage over time, but all damage types. So, Hardy and Elemental Defender, 43 points each, 10% damage reduction. Now, if you want to go with a different setup, you can put more points in the Hardy and Elemental Defender than Thick Skin and Ironclad, but honestly, having more into both makes it, or more into the other two, it makes it better for this, because they're more front-loaded than Hardy and Elemental Defender are. Moving on over here, the next one you want to put into is Bastion. Before you put into the Hardy and or Ironclad and Thick Skin, you want to put into Bastion first, because you want to boost your damage shield capabilities as being a tank. So Bastion's going to be really important to you. You're going to want to get it up to 56 points to get 20% increase in the effectiveness of your damage shields. Doesn't matter the damage shield. All damage shields get boosted by 20% with 56 points. Now, don't go beyond that. And that's because going beyond that is, there's so much diminished returns, it's not even worth it. 43 extra points gives you 5%. That's it. Taking this up to 74 points, or 75 points, will give you 4% more. That's almost 25%, or 25 points more to get that. That's 19 points more, and you're going to get 4%. That's really just a waste of points, and this is where you're going to waste them instead. You're going to put it into 16 into Expert Defender. This is going to reduce the damage you take from light and heavy attacks by 10%. Most enemies in the game, whether it be PvE or PvP, most players use light attack rotations. This allows you to mitigate a lot of those attacks, or they use heavy attacks, mitigate that damage. Most enemies in the game, most mobs, hit you with light and heavy attacks. This helps you mitigate more of that damage, and it gives you greater survivability. It doesn't matter if you're playing a tank, healer, or DPS, this is always good to put into. Next up, we have 8 points in a quick recovery. Now, you can, if you have the points, like in the next update, I would suggest putting more into this than anywhere else. And the reason why is because the more you boost your healing received, the more effective heals are on you. Now, you got to remember, wearing 5 pieces of heavy armor, you get 8% more healing received. And this gives you another 2%, putting you at 10% healing received. Now, being a Nightblade, because I'm using Swallow Soul, I get another 8% while I'm on that bar of healing received. So it just gives me better management of my healing received, allowing me better control of my character's resources, especially when it comes to health. All right, moving on. We have 23 into Warlord, this is going to reduce the cost of your break free by 10%. A lot of people ask me why I do this, and here's the reason why I do this. The more resources you can save by utilizing these things like break free cost reduction, bashing cost reduction, saves you resources. Resources are essential to the game. Resource management is essential to the game. This is a part of that resource management. So putting 23 points in here, I get 10% reduced cost in break free. Break free costs like 4,000 stamina. 10% off of that is pretty good. You know, that's like 400 points. That saves me 400 stamina when I break free. Actually, it's more than that. I just don't remember exactly what it is. But it saves me more resources. Bashing focus. Costs 2,000 and something to bash. With a 10% reduced cost and a glyph that gives me 304 points off, I get more resource management on my bashing. Moving on over here, we have 43 into Mooncalf, and this is where you're going to start with this, with playing a tank. You're going to actually start with putting into Tenacity first, then Mooncalf. And there's a reason why I say this, because in the beginning, when you're playing through dungeons in the normal difficulty, you really don't need a lot of the stuff like block cost reduction. You need this, because this is going to be better for you in the long run. So you want to fill out Tenacity first before you touch anything else. And Tenacity increases the stamina and magicka, your fully charged heavy attacks return, by 14%. So there's a base percentage that you get back from heavy attacks no matter what you play, what role you play, and that's 30%. Well, wearing 5 pieces of heavy armor increases that value by another 25%. So that's 55%. Well, when you add 14 to it, that's 69%, almost 70% of your resources back from your fully charged heavy attacks. It saves you resources. It gives you a really good resource return. So heavy attack and heavy armor, it's good to go with this. Now, if I was playing a tank in medium armor, I'd actually put 75 into here instead of Tenacity. But I would still focus on Tenacity first. Now, the next thing you want to focus on, before I go on, so Mooncalf you don't really need to focus on right away, but it's something good to have. So that extra 10% is really good to have. So put 43 points into Mooncalf. Moving on over here, you want to follow this up next after Tenacity, and that's Shadow Guard. This is going to give you extra block cost reduction. Now, if you want to focus on this first, you can, and then go Tenacity, but I would focus on one or the other right away, because both are essential to tanking. And with 56 points in here, you get 20% reduced cost in blocking. Now, you can take this up to 75 points, giving you another 4%. But honestly, 4% in block cost reductions, unless you're wearing everything block cost and you're trying to get the maximum amount of block cost reduction, it's really not worth it. Moving on, 21 points in the Befoul. This increases the effectiveness of healing reduction abilities like Major Defile, like Reverberating Bash does. This increases that 30% baseline to 36% with this. That makes that effect more effective. So that's why I have 21 points in here. Now, you can take the 21 points out of here and the 6 out of Tumbling if you want and put it into Shadow Guard, taking you up to that 75 points. And then you can take the remainder and put it into Tumbling. It doesn't matter. Now, we have 6 points in the Tumbling. Now, remember how I told you guys with the medium armor passive that you want that athletics because of that 4% reduced cost in dodge rolling as a tank? This reduces it by another 2%, making it an effective 6% reduced cost. Now, that's just to save you resources. Now, in the next update, you can take those 10 points and dump them in here, and it's going to give you greater dodging reduction. Because tanks dodge roll. Tanks block. Tanks break free. So that's essential to them, to have those reduced costs in effect. So that's why I do it. Moving on to the Blue Tree, we have 43 in the Blessed. You don't really need that for this build too much, because you only have one heal that you're using unless you run Refreshing Path. Then you have your Swallow Soul. And those are the only two heals you really have going for you. It's almost better to go with Vigor if you can. And then you can take advantage of Bless. But you don't really need it for this build. I just put it here because, honestly, I had no other place to really use it. So when it comes to tanks mainly focus their damage through light and heavy attacks. And it's really important to focus on the Antarok tree first, because you're going to want to boost your light and heavy attacks as a tank, so that way when you're not only playing in the open world, but you're also playing in dungeons and trials, you get increased damage capabilities. So, right out the door, you can see I put 35 in the physical weapon expert, 56 in the mastered arms. Now, the reason I put 35 in here, this increases my light and heavy attacks by 20%. So it doesn't matter what weapon type I'm using, I can get 20% more out of it. So since I'm running sword and shield, I get 20% more damage capabilities from my character, from light and heavy attacks. On mastered arms, all light and heavy attacks are considered direct damage. So I get that increased by 20%. So that's a 40% increase in my overall damage. I can have no weapon damage and still bust out 2 to 3, 6, 9k heavy attacks. And like 2 to 6k light attacks. With really low, with just the base weapon damage. If I put points into here. That builds my group's DPS. It might not do a whole lot for the group's DPS, but again, the reason you do this is because it does cut down on the time to complete content. So let's say you're going through a dungeon on vet mode, and you're pushing, max penetration with your group and everything, and your character's all of a sudden starting to hit for 3, 4k on your light attacks. Does that 3 to 4k add to the group's total damage? Yes. Is it beneficial? Yes. Is it superficial? Well, yeah, it's also superficial. But any increase in total group damage is an increase, and it's a positive for the group. That's why you build into this. So, moving on to the other one is Shattering Blows. This is 23 points. This gives you an increase, increases your damage done to enemies with damage shields. There's a lot of NPCs or mobs in ESO that use damage shields. This allows you to go through those damage shields and apply damage. So the more damage you can do, the more effective you are in a group. So that's why we put 23 points into there. You're not doing a whole lot, but you're doing a little bit, and it's helping the group. Now, there's an essential reason why you want to focus on this tree first. One, you get retaliation. When you block a heavy attack, your next light attack used within 7 seconds deals 30% more additional damage. A lot of enemies use light and heavy attacks. Remember, I told you that. So when you block those heavy attacks, you also set them off balance and interrupt them. And this is where the next tree will come into play, and I'll explain that in a second. Next up, you get Reposit. So when you block a melee attack, you have a 15% chance to deal 4,032 physical damage to the enemy. This effect can occur once every 5 seconds. So if I'm blocking attacks, I have a 15% chance to redirect 4k damage back to my enemy. That's extra damage being done for the group. Next up, Butcher. Increases the damage done with light and heavy attacks by 5% to enemies below 25% health. Why is that important? Well, here's why it's important. A lot of enemies, especially bosses, go into an execute phase at 25% health. The more damage being done, the more benefits it is to the group in completing that encounter. This allows you to boost your damage capabilities by 5% when they're below 25% health, allowing your light and heavy attacks to do more. That's it. Again, not a whole lot, but can be. Because you're getting 40 here and 5% here, that's 45%. But let's move on to the next tree and we'll explain the rest. So here we have Mighty. We have 43 points on the Mighty. This increases physical, poison, and disease damage by another 10%. So you know that 40% you're getting from your light and heavy attacks? Well, now it's being increased by another 10%. Along with that 5% when they're below 25% health. That's 55% more damage. Now, if you guys didn't know this, whenever you critical strike an enemy or get a critical hit, your damage is increased by 50%. So that means all that damage you did just got boosted by 50%. Now, if I do that and I get a crit, that's why I have 23 points in here. This increases my critical damage by another 10%. So no longer is it just 50%, it's 60% more damage. So I get 60% on top of the 55% from my light and heavy attacks. This is why it's important for a tank to put into these things to boost their overall damage to help the grouping damage. Now, tanks don't do a lot of damage, but their damage adds up, just like DPS does. So moving on to the passives up here, these passives are very essential. Remember that one I told you about here, that when you block a heavy attack, you set the enemies off balance, and you also interrupt them, because you interrupt their attack by blocking it, and then you set them off balance. Well, there's two passives over here that come into play because of that. Opportunist, when you interrupt an enemy, your next physical damage ability used within 7 seconds deals 15% additional damage. That includes light and heavy attacks. This one increases the damage done against off-balance enemies by 10%. So not only do you get that, like all that percentage bonus, that 55% bonus from that light and heavy attacks, and that 60% if you crit, but now you're getting 30% from that light attack, another 15%, which is 55%. That's over 110% more damage from a light attack. That means if you hit them for 3K, just 3K, let's say you crit. So you get 60% on top of that, plus all this from that light attack. That's 110% more damage, plus another 60% increase on top of that. It's almost a 200% increase in damage. This is why it's important to know your role and to know what you can do with your character. This is why it's important for tanks to utilize the tools at hand to not only benefit them, but to benefit their group. Because tanks block a lot. And when they block certain attacks, if they set the enemy off balance, they light attack right away. Why? You get all that greater damage benefit. And especially if they're below 25% health, you get even more damage benefit. And if you happen to crit, you get even more damage benefit. That's the idea of this champion point system. To benefit your character's potential no matter what. So that's it for the champion points. Now let me just show you guys real quick how this build works. Because a lot of people question me all the time, well, how does it work? Well, for this build to work, you have to start with the right stuff, I should say. So you're going to do Mirage, and you're going to pop your buff. Then you're going to use Teleport Strike, go in, taunt, heavy attack, pop your Bone Shield, heavy attack again, and just taunt. And then just keep up block if you need to on the encounter. As you can see, your resources are going to go down, but they're going to go down really slowly. And even if you bash, see what I told you, it saves you resources. This is why we have our gear set up with the block cost reduction here, is for that extra block cost and that reduced cost in bashing. And that's why we have the champion points set up the way we do, is to reduce the cost of our overall use of stuff. Now when it comes to tanking, you're going to be doing a lot of this as a main tank. That's why this is a main tank build, is to give you the ability to be mobile and tank at the same time. And if you need to switch enemies, you can do that, taunt, and then go right back like this, taunt, and then heavy attack when you have your Bone Shield up. So you can keep your resources pretty well maintained. Look at this. That's 4K from a heavy attack that I'm getting every time in resources. And now if I pop a potion and I use up all my resources again, watch what happens when I heavy attack. That's 5K almost. It's almost 5K resources. This is really important to anyone playing a tank. Resource management is super, super important. And that's how this tank works, is it works off of utilizing resource management. It works off of utilizing all those things to teach you how to get to end game and be better at the end game. And that's the Shadow Guard. So I really hope you guys like this build. I had a lot of fun playing this build and testing it. And honestly, I'm actually thinking about making it myself. I don't play a lot of these builds I'm offering because I just don't have the space for this many different builds. If they gave me the option to have 35 builds or 35 characters, I would have 35 characters. So, but if you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me or more videos by me, hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.